Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're literally going to uncover the architecture of English. You know, you can really think of language just like constructing a building. You can't just throw a bunch of materials together and hope for the best, right? So we're going to start with the absolute fundamental bricks and mortar, the word order, and then slowly build our way up to the finished, polished structures of practical composition. Whether you're firing off a quick email or drafting a highly formal document, understanding these blueprints is absolutely going to change how you build your sentences. Let's get into it. Here is our blueprint for today. We'll start with grammar rules for word order, move into the adjective hierarchy, then look at structuring factual writing, crafting perfect invitations, and finally putting it into practice.
All right, let's dive straight into Section 1, Grammar Rules and Word Order.
Let me ask you a really fundamental question to kick things off. When you're constructing a sentence, exactly where do you place a word that tells you how frequently an event occurs? You know, words like often, frequently, usually, or sometimes. Now, it might just feel instinctive to you, but there are actual, rigid, structural rules governing this. Just as a bricklayer needs to know exactly where to slap down the mortar, a writer has to know exactly where to place their modifiers.
Consider the sentence, she leaves without permission often. It sounds, well, a bit clunky, right? Kind of tacked on at the end. But if we shift it to, she often leaves without permission, boom, it locks right into place. Adverbs of frequency generally belong right before the verb they modify, which in this case is leaves. This specific placement acts as a crucial piece of our sentence's mortar, holding the subject and the action together securely and naturally.
But what happens when we start adding even more bricks? A simple sentence like, he went out yesterday, just uses place and time. But when you add frequency to the mix, that frequency block needs to find its proper structural load-bearing spot, which actually pushes it to come before the time. You wouldn't say, he went there in 1997 often. No way. You say, he went there often in 1997.
Moving right along to Section 2, the adjective hierarchy.
Think about this for a second. Would you naturally say a wooden old box or an old wooden box? I bet you almost certainly said an old wooden box, even if you couldn't explain exactly why. Well, it turns out there is a strict, hidden hierarchy behind that instinct. We actually have to move from general qualities like size, shape, or weight, then flow into color, and finally end with adjectives derived from nouns or gerunds right before hitting the core noun itself. So it becomes an old, square, brown, wooden box. Try mixing that order up. Seriously, try it. It instantly feels like a building that's leaning completely to one side. The English language absolutely loves this specific structural progression.
All right, Section 3, structuring factual writing.
So, now that we have the words in the right order, how do we put the ideas in the right order? Factual writing deals with down-to-earth, everyday situations. It doesn't call for wildly imaginative or poetic flair, it requires pure logic. You need to strictly follow 4 steps to ensure your composition is easily understood by a reader. First up, clarity and economy. Just state the facts clearly, using only the essential details. Second, correct order. Arrange your points logically, step by step. Third, relevant facts. Leave out those original, imaginative touches and just stick to what actually matters. And fourth, arrangement of facts. Use short, simple sentences that flow smoothly into one another so the reader is just carried along effortlessly. Let's move to Section 4, crafting perfect invitations.
Mastering those factual writing blueprints perfectly equips us to construct specific, real-world formats, like social invitations. And there is a stark structural difference between these two forms of social architecture. Informal invitations feel like brief personal notes. They use the first person, I or we, and warm standard greetings. But a formal invitation, the kind used for public celebrations like weddings, that operates purely in the third person. Mr. and Mrs. Dasgupta cordially invite. Notice that. The hosts don't refer to themselves as we. It's highly structured, usually spaced out centrally on the page, and completely stripped of casual conversation. To ensure your formal invitation is structurally sound, you absolutely must adhere to specific rules. It's a rigid formula. You write in the third person, you drop the date the invitation was sent, that is standard practice. There's zero greeting, no dear so-and-so, and there's no signature at the end. And of course, always remember the French acronym RSVP, Répondez s'il vous plaît, meaning please reply, which gets anchored neatly at the bottom right with the reply address sitting right across from it on the bottom left. It's really a masterclass in factual, purposeful arrangement.
And finally, Section 5, putting it into practice.
Now for the final stage of our construction. We're going to observe the finished building by putting these skills into practice. Let's see how professional architects of the English language actually use these rules out in the wild. We have this passage about the great Greek builder Daedalus. King Minos asked him to build an underground prison so strong that nobody could ever escape. An endless confusion of long, winding passages known as the labyrinth. And, it's highly fitting for us, because Daedalus constructing his intricate labyrinth perfectly mirrors our own journey today of constructing precise, intricate sentences and paragraphs. To write well is essentially to guide your reader through a maze of thoughts without ever losing them.
And just look at the mortar holding this specific sentence from the text together. Notice how the author uses adverbs of degree, like fairly and to, in this gripping line. Daedalus doesn't just tell Icarus to stay close to the water, he tells him to stay fairly close. He doesn't just say, don't go near the sun, he says, don't go too near. These carefully placed adverbs precisely build the dramatic stakes of Icarus's doomed flight. It's not just extra fluff, this is the literal load-bearing structure of the sentence's meaning.
So, I'm leaving you with this thought to ponder. Now that you have the blueprints for flawless English, you know exactly where to place your adverbs, how to stack your adjectives, and how to logically organize your facts into cohesive paragraphs. How will you use these exact building blocks to craft your own compelling narratives? Every single time you sit down to write, you are an architect, so go build something incredible. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll chat you next time.